Good evening. Welcome to the overnight edition of From Day One. Now, right before our about does come on, I do have to acknowledge my apologies. The part B said part A in the top right hand corner of the whole episode. Just when I was just stupid. So without further ado, here comes Art Bell and Jason Martell, The Lost Cycle of Time, Part 2, as we rock through the overnight here in Dominion.
Egyptologists say that that's a lotus flower, and the bulb, what looks like a bulb, is actually just the aroma coming out of the flower. I mean, it's not a very good explanation from the scientific community, but
so what did you do? You said you created a light bulb as a demonstration, yes?
I did.
Did you make a light bulb? I mean...
Well, here's what I did. So I hired a person who is an expert in creating lighting, various like custom bulbs, right. And I had him create a filament-based bulb that's a plasma bulb. So just like we've heard of swamp gas, it's possible that gases coming out of just natural occurrence are ignited by a small heat source and they create phosphorescence.
Right.
So it's very possible that the Egyptians could access a swamp or some methane gas and give it a small source of energy, which is another thing I'll talk to you about, and create phosphorescence. So all I did was create a very light plasma bulb with 4 volts introduced to it, create a light, a phosphorescence glow.
Fascinating. Okay.
Now to top that off, the powering of that device, I created an ancient Baghdad battery, which I've also had tested for Discovery Channel and for History Channel.
Explain a Baghdad battery.
Yes. They found about a dozen of these in ancient in southern Iraq that date back to times of Sumer and such, 2500, 3000 BC. Mm-hmm. And essentially it's a clay pot about 6 inches tall with a copper lining and an iron rod down the center. And we've scientifically known for sure that it creates an electrical charge when we introduce any weak acidic acid. Yeah.
And probably 4 volts would have been achievable, and so that's what you use.
Exactly. And I, show those sometimes when I give a lecture. I connect the battery to the bulb and display that. So those are interesting pieces of artifacts and things that we can demonstrate. But, as I was mentioning, the astronomical alignments and some of these things. So in Dendera, they also have a zodiacal relief that shows all of the constellations, above Giza, but they show a view of the sky that's thousands of years earlier than 2500 BC. So it almost seems like the Egyptian culture at 2500 BC was well aware of this large cycle of time and referenced that thousands of years before they were there, they were in a much better state, closer to the golden age. And so they recorded this by showing the positions of the stars as to what they would have been, let's say, at 10,500 BC.
Gotcha.
Very interesting that they would make such references.
All right, I want to talk a little more about Planet X. So hold tight. We're going to take a break here. We actually have to do that about twice an hour. And we'll certainly dive right back into this. What do you think so far, folks? Could it be? I mean, after all, we are here. Are you willing to look at alternate possibilities with regard to how we arrived? I'm Art Bell. Don't let the spirit move just yet. We'll let you know when it's time to dial. We're speaking with Jason Martell, and we're talking about the past. I mean the severe past. There's something I want to interject here, which is probably a non sequitur, but I can't help myself. We're talking about the pyramid, and Jason and I had the opportunity years ago to, this is when Zahi Hawass was in charge, and before all the trouble in Egypt, way before, to go, and I was lucky. They knew who I was. When it was my chance to get to the Great Pyramid, I actually went to the top. I got to lie in the sarcophagus, and I don't want to go woo-woo on you here, but and it may have been just, I don't know, the climb to the top. It was humid, it was hot inside the pyramid. But lying in the sarcophagus, I definitely felt something that, kind of hard to describe. It felt something. There have been many thoughts about what the Great Pyramid was or is. Any thoughts yourself on what that was intended to do?
Well, there's lots of theories out there, Art. I couldn't stick to just one, but I do like to talk about the various theories. I've always resonated with Chris Dunn and his idea that it's a power plant of some kind. It seems that around the world there are monuments placed at geodetic points. They're somehow connected. Maybe at one point there was some type of world energy grid, and these monuments, Stonehenge, Giza, and various other sites, tapped into this energy. Or, it could be something more basic, utilizing elements. I heard an interesting theory around the water and the way the Nile and the tide recedes and such, that there are channels and ducts that come up under the Sphinx and under the pyramid, and just the pressure of this water filling these canals and pressing up against the pyramid actually creates energy and static charge that they were somehow maybe utilizing. It doesn't surprise me that if you were sitting in the King's Chamber sarcophagus or the Queen's Chamber, that you might actually feel some type of resonance or an energy.
Well, I don't know if it was self-induced, psychological, or because of the unusual conditions, but I'll talk about it some other time, but I definitely felt something strong. Now, there are others who feel that the purpose of it and the alignment was to launch one's soul onto its journey, right?
Well, and, we have these various shafts and things that there's a shaft in the King's Chamber and in the Queen's Chamber that are very specific, that point to a star constellation, one of the belt stars of Orion, the star system Sirius. And I'm sure you noticed that when you were in the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, if this was a tomb, where are all the hieroglyphs, right?
Right.
It's like a big empty room. So
no, it is a puzzle. I admit that. So you take the technological road because it kind of fits what you're saying, and that's fine. And it could certainly well be. I don't know.
And there's probably some stuff in there that either they're covering up to a certain degree or we're just not getting full access to. That little square, I think it's like a 1 foot by 1 foot shaft that they sent that little robot, the Oopalot, up into and found that door. Mm-hmm. Well, they did go behind that door, and they detected metal objects in some type of a hidden room, but kind of never made it out publicly.
Okay, and you also, as does Richard, you see a connection between the monuments on Mars and those on Earth, yes?
Well, when we look at the fact that there's pyramids and a Sphinx object, in Giza, and then on Mars there are pyramids, and from my own analysis using, graphics and things to extrapolate data, that face there's just no way that the symmetry and eye and nose, headdress, winged formation over the head, like a headdress formation, there's too many pieces there to be natural occurrence, and it does look kind of lion human-like. So, yeah, I think Richard caught on to that, and I give him kudos, but I really don't think we can answer these questions.
I'm sorry, Jason. Somebody just sent a wormhole message to me referring to you, asking if Richard C. Hoagland and Zachariah Sitchin had a child.
Oh, God. I'm going to take that as a compliment, but,
Well, you should. You should. Somebody's got to research. That's funny. Sorry.
It's all good. Richard definitely is on to something there, and I think we're really not going to be able to answer these questions until we have an actual frame of reference from the surface of Mars, so that just like here on Earth, these monuments we're seeing align to astronomical points, have math built into them. So I'm sure that if we ever actually go to Mars, some of these pieces are really going to stack up. Your producer was nice enough to send the number 9 image from your site. And
now take a good long look at that. What do you think, Jason? Is that weird or what? Look carefully. Do you see the perfectly circular pipe sticking out?
It's really, I don't see how that couldn't be some type of a technology, a gear or a wheel.
Thank you. I look at a lot of what Richard sends me and I go, sorry, Richard, rocks. But we got to this number 9 and I went, oh my God.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. Is there any way that nature does that? No, I don't think so.
No, it doesn't. And, you're also familiar with the work who should be more prominently noted. He's probably just out of the game. But Dr. Mark Carlotto, who was an image expert and looked at a lot of the algorithms and things, Cydonia, people don't realize that, there's just, if you do some very basic science on these areas that NASA neglects, it really makes you wonder. Dr. Mark Carlotto is someone who, is very familiar with running image analysis, and he would show various examples with Russian satellite telemetry. They would run mathematical algorithms on some Russian satellite image, and the math would tell you there's a 98 probability that that's actually a tank or some troops being, covered by some shrub or a tarp. When we run those same algorithms on the surface of Mars, Cydonia, the face, the pyramids, they all come out to be way over 90% probability of artificiality. But NASA never did any of those types of tests, right? They just said, don't look here. It's a trick of light and shadow. When, in fact, it wasn't a trick of light and shadow. And Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar found other frame grabs where the sun was in a different reference.
Well, that's why I said to you earlier, isn't it possible that NASA is laying all this in front of us in plain sight, and when somebody finally says, I've had it, this is not formed by wind or erosion or whatever, this is not a natural object, when somebody finally says that and really says it loudly, NASA will say, well, we've been releasing the pictures all along. We're not surprised.
I guess I would agree with you there. I've seen in my career being interested in these topics. I started out very motivated 15, 19 years ago in college, and no one would hear it. No one would even consider the idea that any of this was logical. That is changing now because of all the things that we're learning that, go into that pot and it gets stirred. So, yeah, I think there is a desensitizing of the public going on. And if anyone hears stories like Gary McKinnon and others that, sometimes tiptoe into areas that they're not supposed to or hack a computer at NASA, you do have to take these still with at least some realm of conjecture that it could be true. And NASA, again, is a public space agency, but from its inception, it's under the Department of Defense, and anything they find that would be really cool, they're not going to release it.
NASA paid Brookings $50,000 in 1960 to look into the possible implications of discovering alien life in space and what it would mean to society, right?
Yeah.
And the basic conclusion of Brookings was what?
Well, they basically said that the fabric of society, the economic complex, the religious complex, would really be thrown for a loop. And it's better to quarantine this information until there's an established plan, a way to essentially what we were just joking about, either desensitize the public or, handle this with the proper quarantine procedures.
Mm-hmm. So you think we're still in the period of quarantine?
I do. And, as I mentioned when I first started, I usually, when I give a lecture or do a talk, I cite evidence because there are artifacts, there are science that our understandings currently can put into a spectrum of truth with some of these ancient pieces, artifacts and such. But when we get into more of the current topics, it gets a little more slippery and, difficult to not only put evidence behind it, but, the Department of Defense and national security, I don't really have any interest in upsetting the powers that be, if you will. So there is a fine line, I think, to looking at some of these topics where I think it's best to probably just stick to what we've learned in the past to help us see what could be possibly our future.
With regard to NASA, they have been making noise lately, Jason, about some big announcement that's coming up. I've heard dates for the announcement. I've heard them saying something amazing is going to be announced. And I'm wondering if you think that's going to be NASA saying we have discovered microbiological life of some sort on Mars.
I think it's time. Yeah, I think it's probably time that they do step up. And I don't think they're going to actually be able to confirm micro, organisms, but they might actually further pinpoint that microorganisms lived in the past or something.
Okay. All right. Something that people could digest without going, oh my God, everything I thought I knew was wrong.
Right. Yes.
So you expect such an announcement, I don't know, in the next 5 or 10 years or sooner?
I would sure hope so.
Okay. All right. Let's go back now to the pale gods that were depicted. It doesn't make sense in South America, where people, of course, have darker skin because of the sun. In fact, that's true right across the world, in Africa or Southeast Asia or wherever you go, where there's lots of sun, you have darker skin on people. It's protection for them. Now, it is odd that they would not make these gods in their own image, but rather pale-skinned. It doesn't make sense unless, and I'll let you finish.
Well, unless there was, let's call it some extraterrestrial race that is probably very close to us, maybe even related to us in some way, or some lost civilization that we just don't understand that existed here on Earth, but they somehow were influencing all of the cultures around the world. So just like the idea of an Atlantis, if there was an Atlantean culture, they wouldn't have been technologically advanced on one continent. They would have been a global civilization. And that's what we see, Art, is that there's an evidence by these monuments and the architecture of these monuments around the world that pinpoints a lost race or a lost civilization. And here's an actual even further detail that I've just been recently kind of pondering is when we look at some of these ancient sites, really ancient, even the ones that are just popping up. So Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the Moai heads in Rapa Nui Island, the figurines in Bata Valley, Indonesia, and even the figurines depicted by the Sumerians all have a similar style of a creature, a being that is very slender, and their arms are always wrapped at the waist. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the Moai heads as an example on Rapa Nui, most people might not know that they're not just heads. We've actually dug out below the head, and there's a full body just underground of these long, slender beings. We see these same beings depicted at Göbekli Tepe. And again, they all have their hands folded at the waist. I think, Art, that what we're seeing is these older civilizations are all referencing knowledge from this lost race, this lost culture that influenced all the greats that we know of now, but beyond them, we've lost.
Okay, Jason, wouldn't you think that if there was this great civilization that was on Earth at any time, that there would be more? Yes, we've got depictions on rocks and things like that. But wouldn't there be somehow preserved examples of some of the technology that you're talking about?
Well, as our technology advances, we wonder, like, is a USB drive or a DVD Blu-ray disc going to be worth anything in 1,000 years? And, when we look at some of the things that, like crystal skulls or some of these rocks that we know a crystal can actually hold data. Now, we don't use it yet in our own, like in a computer, but I think, Art, that it's very possible in the future when our technology advances, we start to store data. I don't want to say literally in the cloud, but, everything, even a rock, it's capturing the energy vibrations of anything that passes by it. And it sits there for thousands of years. Why can't we just tap into that rock somehow and extract that data? Now, I know that sounds funny and far-fetched.
No, but not as funny and not as far-fetched as you would think.
Yeah.
I think there probably is something to that. In fact, I think science is even working on the fact that information seems to get stored in particular things subject to vibration, like windows and things like that.
Yes.
So, no, it's not so far-fetched.
Well, so I think...
And by the way,
yeah.
in my opinion, as fast as technology is moving, I think that in, 10 years, let's say, a Blu-ray disc will be off somewhere with beta machines.
Right. Yeah, it'll just be a basic Frisbee, and that's all it'll be good for.
That's right.
Now, Art, see, I do, again, as I referenced this lost cycle of time, I don't think everything is linear. I don't think it's going to be, we're in the future just going to become more and more advanced, and it'll continue that way. There seems to be a cycle here that repeats on Earth where we go into the Dark Ages, and then into the Golden Age, and then back into the Dark Ages, and into the Golden Age. And I say that because we can look at the information being depicted by the ancients where they used this astronomical calendar based on the heavens. So the Sumerians, we think, because they're still the oldest on record, were one of the first to divide the heavens into 12 parts and assign it a constellation. So today, there seems to be a large cycle of time where we go through each one of these zodiacal symbols. It lasts about 2,000 years, where based on the alignments of where our Earth is to the sun and the star constellation behind that, the ancients had a very simple and ingenious way of knowing what age they were in. And just so that we understand the context of this, right now we're in the age of Pisces. Now, the age of Pisces is the symbol of a fish, which is also the symbol of Jesus. We're in the time of Jesus. That's going to end in about 150 years when we go into the age of Aquarius, all based on astronomical information. So it's very interesting that the ancients used this large clock to know, and here's how they did it. If you went out early in the morning, just as the sun is rising, whatever star constellation, Aquarius, Cancer, Leo, whatever constellation the sun is rising against, they would know, we're in the age of Aquarius, we're in the age of Pisces. So they went to great lengths, Art, to know exactly where they were in this cycle, because all the ancient cultures, over 30 of them, explain how this cycle affects us. And I want to kind of put into context so the audience understands. There's 3 cycles that we're aware of as far as the Earth's movement in the heavens. The first 2 we're very aware of. The third is where it gets a little tricky. First one is we're spinning on our axis. So
I'll tell you what, this is a good break point. Spinning on our... Okay, so hold tight. We'll be right back. Jason Martell is my guest, and this really is fascinating stuff. Does it just happen again and again and again? And oh yeah, X. Is it coming back? That definitely would change things. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you, Art.
Really, you were talking about Earth spinning on its axis, and for a second, let's go back and talk about Planet X. That is a subject that really has a lot of people going. I get emails and communication all the time from people saying, Planet X is coming, it's coming, it's coming. You can see it on a clear day or a clear night. People are sure that it's just about here or will be here shortly. And I've always kind of gone, I don't know. It seems like the astronomers would be letting us know if Planet X was headed our way. But that doesn't mean it isn't. And that doesn't mean that a rogue planet couldn't be out there because it could. So what's your best guess about Planet X?
Well, I think in this last hour, I'm going to try and hit it home for you because I know a lot of people are interested in Nibiru, Planet X, especially what they hear online. And in this last hour, I'm going to kind of talk about the new model, which I think explains why there would be a Planet X, or it helps put into the context of a Planet X existence. But
excuse me, Jason, do you mean you're only going to be on for another hour? Because we had 2 hours of show to go.
Wow, that's great. Then my bad.
Know that, huh?
I didn't know that.
Can you stick around?
I think I can, yes.
Okay, all right. Planet X.
So basically, the Planet X topic is one that's very interesting because up till now, everyone has been assuming that it's just one sun, that, our solar system is comprised of one sun, and planet X is on this huge elliptical orbit based on the ancient information. And so it very rarely comes by our inner solar system. However, that might not actually be the complete model. Based on most of the latest science that we're getting from our telescopes in space, most solar systems, external solar systems, not ours, most solar systems are binary. They have at least two suns, some in an intricate dance up to 6 or more suns in this, unbelievable orbit. But there's strong evidence to suggest we are a binary solar system, so that we actually have two suns. Our second sun would either be a brown dwarf at this point, or is something that we haven't been able to identify. Like, for instance, let's call it maybe Sirius could be our second sun, and it's somehow in this intricate dance with us, which is kind of where I'm going to lead into this spinning on the axis before we picked up after the break. So I realize the Planet X topic is very sensitive to a lot of listeners, and hopefully in the next couple hours, we can really start to boil down some of the science that I've been latching onto and finding very intriguing, which further change the variables of a Planet X model.
There are a number of people I've spoken to recently who believe there is another sun, and that it is hidden and we can't see it because it's behind our current sun in some way.
Well, Art, there are over 30 cultures that were aware of this large cycle of time and specifically talk about two suns. Even the Sumerians have a very interesting tablet view of what appears to be like the Tower of Babel, and they're ascending it, and there's two suns at the top. But many cultures were aware of the idea of us having two suns, a lot of them coming out of the ancient Vedic texts in India and such. But where this...
All right, that issue aside for a second of the second sun, although we'll come back to it, but Planet X, would you regard Planet X as essentially a rogue planet that visits on a very long orbital time, like 25,000 years, something like that?
Right. Well, I think the orbital pattern that is talked about in some of these ancient Sumerian texts is they give it a 3,600-year orbit around our sun. Oh. We look at the Sumerian evidence and see that they had a very advanced math system based on two numbers, 6 and 10. So the Sumerians had mathematical constructs and diagrams that showed how they were able to divide into very small numbers and very large numbers. Some of these numbers ticked up into the billions. So one of the numbers that they used was 360. They were the first ones to designate 360 degrees to a circle. Now, if you just take a string and attach it to a stick, put the stick into the dirt and outstretch that string, and then walk around, you create a circle. But they were the first ones to actually designate 360 degrees, and they called it a shar, which meant a complete circle. So they gave the reference of Nibiru, this planet X, as having a shar of 3,600 years, which meant a complete orbit.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, 3,600 years. So it would come and visit every 3,600 years, presumably at roughly the same distance from the Earth?
Yes, and I did a little mathematical calculation a while ago, and around 2003, when this was, a little bit more hyped on people listening to things on the internet or looking at webcam photos that possibly show a lens flare interpreted as a second sun. I did some math that showed, if our solar system's been around our Earth, more importantly, for let's say 4.7 billion years, and Nibiru's orbit is 3,600 years, or every 3,600 years it's potentially coming by Earth or the inner part of the solar system. If we divide 4.7 billion years by 3,600, we get well over 1 million times Nibiru has completed an orbit through the inner part of the solar system. So it's probably likely that not every time there's an orbit, that it affects us. We could be on the complete other side of the sun when Nibiru comes into the inner part of the solar system. It might have minimal effects on us.
Well, it would change something. I mean, it would be close to something in the solar system, and so there'd be some great change every time, I would think.
And it's interesting.
Perhaps not an Earth, but some great change.
Right. And, I know that people can point to things, the planets heating up in various spots, Jupiter's spot and various things. Can't explain, what Nibiru's impact would be on us, but looking at the evidence, if we look at the spacing between the planets, just between Mars and Jupiter is where the asteroid belt is.
Right.
Now, right between Mars and Jupiter, there's plenty of room for a large planetoid object to be passing through. And there's actually even gaps in the asteroid belt that could be considered planet-sized gaps, as if something had passed through it. And Art, I always jokingly made the reference that, we're talking about the 12th planet from the Sumerians' perspective. They called it the 12th planet, as well as Nibiru or Planet X. But if we just think of it as the 12th planet passing between Mars and Jupiter, I used to make the joke that it's like MJ12, Mars, Jupiter, 12th planet. But it's probably nothing. But, Nibiru has been coming through our solar system for millions or at least over 1 million times. And, I know the current hype today is that people are interested when they hear the historical evidence of how this interaction in the past caused a great flood and how the ancients are tracking this planet. But I agree with you in that I remember Hale-Bopp very clearly. And I actually, as I mentioned, lived in San Diego, and my parents lived in Rancho Santa Fe, and something happened a few blocks over from my house.
Yes.
But, the amateur community of astronomers has been very astute at always pointing out things like Shoemaker-Levy 9 or Hale-Bopp well before the professional community, and then it gets escalated to the actual science level. So if there is a Planet X, we're talking something 4 to 8 times the size of Earth, going on the Sumerian descriptions. This is a large object. Anything anywhere near the inner part of the solar system, there's a pretty good likelihood that the amateur astronomers would pick that up well on its way here.
And if it made a fairly close pass, the impact on Earth?
Well, in the past, as I mentioned, the Sumerians give a very elongated tale that explain how in the past, when Nibiru passed by, it actually caused gravitational pull on our ice sheets, our tectonic ice sheets up at the top. And just like a ice cube being dropped into a glass of water, one of our ice sheets at the top of the Earth just kind of cracked off into the ocean and instantly raised the water 300 feet or more. So, that's kind of a little disconcerting to think about, that it has had this effect in the past. But really where I focused my attention with the whole idea of Planet X and Nibiru isn't on the catastrophe potential. It's more on the potential of reuniting with ancestors that are off planet. If Nibiru does exist, it's very possible that we actually have ancestors that live on that planet. That's pretty heavy.
Yes, it's pretty heavy. I don't know that we'd be happy to see them again.
Or would they be happy to see us and what we've become?
Jason, if you do the math, and I know that you're doing the math, when might we expect, let's assume it's absolutely true for a moment, Planet X, when would we expect a close pass again?
Well, Zecharia Sitchin had a specific date that's, a few hundred years from now. It's really something that's going to be difficult to pinpoint until our telescopes and science can actually confirm where this planet is. Now, since the early 80s, Zecharia Sitchin met with the lead astronomer for the Naval Observatory, Dr. Robert Harrington, and compared the Nibiru model with the Naval Observatory model, which concluded Dr. Robert Harrington had a model that showed by just including one extrasolar planet, it explains all the anomalies we see in our current solar system, why Uranus is tilted on its side, why why Pluto and Neptune could be possibly dislodged moons of Saturn, various things that we see. At the time when he was doing his calculations, again in the 80s, Dr. Harrington said all of the planets are suffering from something called perturbations. All of the planets are being pulled in a certain direction within space, but there's nothing there. There should be a large planet, but there's nothing there.
No, it's kind of like thinking of a pool table with all the balls on the table scattered around, and then taking the cue ball and slamming it into the middle and see what happens. And only actually it's worse than that because of the gravitational effects. You don't even have to hit anything; you just have to get close, right?
It's going to whiz by it, right? And so, there's been this model being calculated for quite a while now that shows, there's probably something out there that's affected our orbit of the planets in the past. And now, as we look into this extrasolar planet X, is there another large body within our system? What do? We go ahead and demote Pluto to not being a planet. I don't agree with that. But it is an interesting thought that we are now using extremely advanced telescopes. We have one out there now called the Spitzer telescope. Actually, I think it was originally called Certus, and they renamed it to Spitzer. So either one of those names would bring it up, Certa for Spitzer, if you Google it. This telescope is amazing. It's sitting out in space, and it's able to temperature regulate itself, where it sits at a temperature just below freezing. And other telescopes that we have out there, like Hubble and the IRAS, most of these other telescopes are not able to penetrate these large dust clouds. When we start to look really deep into space, there are certain areas where there's these, dark, cloudy masses, and we can't see through them. However, these new telescopes, like the Spitzer, are completely infrared. So they're able to calibrate themselves to the temperature of this dust cloud and just penetrate right through it using infrared, essentially a heat signature. So we're starting to get detail and see all of these new suns and different solar systems. And there is a large likelihood, Art, that we will actually identify a rogue planet that fits the Nibiru model within the next 10 years that's actually viewable and trackable within our solar system. At that point, then it becomes a little more interesting to go, well, you're saying that there's this planet 48 times the size of Earth, and we're tracking its orbit, and it's going to come into the inner part of the solar system or be near us in 200 years? Interesting. We should keep an eye on it.
Keep an eye on it. Jason, that would be an ELE event, probably. If it got close. An LE. It's definitely an LE. I mean, I don't know if it would be another great flood, or if a hunk of the planet would break off, or we'd assume a new orbit that ended up changing temperature on Earth by about 100 degrees. Something awful like that is definitely possible.
It is a possibility, but, there's really nothing that anyone can do at that level. If there's going to be an LE event like Deep Impact, what am I going to do to worry about it, or even, research something like that? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Where I find it interesting, Art, is the fact that, there seems to be another angle to just the catastrophe side of possibility.
All right, but stick with that for just a moment, and then we'll move on. Jason, right. If your research led to the fact that Nibiru actually was coming, Planet X was or is coming, and in a couple of 100 years will produce an LE like that here, would it be your position that the people of the world should be told, or that the people of the world really should go on about their business, and telling them would only produce the ELE event probably ahead of time anyway, because everybody panic and go nuts?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. I think my personal opinion is I do think that the world has a right to know, and I do think that the powers that be financially, I don't mean the government, private equity, would take our race off planet. I know X Prize, Bronson, Bigelow, there are many people that are looking into, taking us into space. So I think in a couple hundred years, we're probably going to advance very quickly in that realm. But really, who knows? And this really will go back to the topic of this lost cycle of time, in that there seems to be, again, which we're going to get into, a reason why we go into the dark ages, forget everything, and then go into this golden age and have this enlightenment. But it's very possible that, there's another factor outside of just the cycle, which is catastrophic events. In the last time we were in the golden age, I calculate that there was also a cataclysmic event, meaning we're super advanced technologically and spiritually, and here comes a huge asteroid or something that, wipes us all out and really makes us lose touch with this lost information. That could happen again.
Well, Jason, maybe it's sort of a cosmic race. In other words, this planet comes by however many years it is. And it's a race to see if we have become technologically advanced enough to do something about it and get humans elsewhere to continue the human race, as it were. And maybe we just haven't quite made, one race just yet. But we're advancing very quickly now. We're going very quickly now, so you never know. We might make it this time.
Well, ever since, some of these, like presidents, like Reagan, giving his speech in front of the UN, about, isn't there already an extraterrestrial presence? I think it's really interesting that, within our lifetime, hopefully some of this knowledge will become more prevalent. And there does seem to be some type of desensitizing. And I almost think, Art, that, it seems like Earth is the one on quarantine. If we look at, the idea of like a galactic federation, Star Wars, Star Trek, some conglomerate races collaborating, if they were to look at us and see us blowing each other up, expelling natural resources, why would they want to give us more technology when we're so unstable? It seems almost like we're being nudged to make these decisions for ourselves so that we can be welcomed to this galactic table, if you will.
Maybe that's it. When we finally win the race, then we're welcomed at the table. Hold tight, Jason. Jason Martell is my guest, and we're talking about things past. Very, very past. I'm Art Bell, and this, of course, is Dark Matter on Sirius XM exclusively.
Transport your thoughts to Art or his guest by pointing your browsing device to artbell.com and jump into the wormhole if you dare.
If you dare. That's right. All right, Jason Martell is my guest, and here's an optimist sending me a message, Jason. John, who says, hey, Art, or I guess, hey, Jason, could the asteroid belt be what's left of Planet X? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially talking about a collision between one of the moons of Nibiru and our primitive Earth, and the intermingling of the waters from, Nibiru and its moon, as well as with Earth. And that's probably where we initially had life being seeded on our planet. The evolutionary process on Nibiru could have been taking place a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that the asteroid belt might actually contain other fragments of life that show a connection between Nibiru and Earth.
Well, I think John was hoping that Planet X is no longer with us, that that all that's left of it now is the asteroid belt.
Right. Well, there was a very excellent researcher, Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, a good friend of mine that unfortunately passed away a little while ago, and he wrote a book called The Exploded Planet Hypothesis. Mm-hmm. And, essentially when we look at all of the other planets in our system, even our moon, we see extensive fragmentation from meteorites and comets and various things. So it's very possible that there was, some type of a large, event in the past that caused a lot of these potholes and things that we see not only on our moon, but on some of the other planets.
Okay. You have mentioned here something about a discovery that was made, something 2,000 years old, some kind of mechanism found in 1901 by divers. What was that? Yes,
that's an excellent piece of technology that was found in, around 1901 off the coast of Antikythera, a small island near Greece there. And it's an interesting device because it's probably about 2,000 years old, and it's more complicated than a modern-day Swiss watch. It has somewhere between 35 and 70 different cogs and wheels, all intricately connected. And the Antikythera mechanism was used for two purposes. At least that's what we theorized. One was for as an astronomical device, so that as a person navigating on a ship, they could use this device to tune it to a certain point, to a certain star, as an example, and it would help them navigate the seas. The other purpose of it seemed to be as an astrological device, where it could tell you, like, if you were born on a certain day, that the planet Jupiter aligns with Mars, and then they would be able to give you more information about the zodiacal specificity of your birth date. But a pretty interesting piece of technology that's over 2,000 years old, and we really only accredit it to someone like maybe Archimedes, but we really don't know who invented it.
Jason, when scientists, archaeologists find something really old that they cannot explain, they have a way of sort of putting that stuff up on the shelf and just ignoring it because it doesn't fit into the paradigm that they've decided is the way things were.
Yep. We've seen that in many instances of, one of the greatest examples I like through our history is references of the power of flight. We see on various continents depictions of what are mislabeled as bird or insect models that under closer scrutiny, we found one in Egypt in the tomb of an Egyptian governor, and it's labeled as a bird model, but when you look at it, it has all the intrinsic characteristics of a plane and none of the intrinsic characteristics of a bird. Same thing in South America. We found these trinkets, these gold trinkets that look like, for all intents and purposes, little jets, and they have a 90-degree tail fin, and they don't look like a bird. They're mislabeled as insect models, but I think they're actually demonstrations for power of flight.
You actually have something called a Sumerian rocket, don't you?
Well, not myself, but yes, there's an actual term called a Shem, and the Sumerian descriptions explain how the gods, the Anunnaki, had these large ships where they somehow, a small piece called the Shem would detach and come down to Earth. That's how the gods descended to Earth, was on this Shem. And it looks just like a rocket capsule, just like what we would do today in a return capsule coming back to Earth, a little triangular shaped tip. And it wasn't just the Sumerians. Now, if it was just them, it'd be like, well, that's coincidental. But various other cultures, even in India, the Buddha would be ascending or descending in something called a stupa, which again looks like this triangular shaped kind of a pod. So yeah, it's a really interesting paradox there, Art, that a lot of the mislabeled pieces of evidence have either been put on a shelf and called something inappropriate, where it's not, it's an insect instead of a plane, or they're just not able to classify what it is.
Jason, if what you say is true, if these cycles come back again and again and again, wouldn't you think that we'd better get our space program going again quickly? I do, but for various reasons. I think the threat of us having to leave the planet because of some catastrophe is less likely. I think the idea that, as we were mentioning before the break, there's a galactic community. I think I'd be much more interested in being able to interact with beings that are not from Earth. Let me give you an example. I love my pets, and they rely on me for everything. I feed them, I give them, their house, and I give them love. Sure. And they must look at me in such awe. I'm this being that gives them everything, and I'm playing with laptops, and I Skype them, and they're like, how does he talk to me through this thing, right? But they don't have any of them yet constructed any tall, pale Jasons?
No, I need to look in the birdcage a little closer, but no, not that I'm aware of. Okay. But what's interesting, Art, is that this connection that I have with my animals, imagine how they must look at me in awe and reverence. They love me.
Oh, yes.
We as humans supposedly had some connection with something higher than us, where we identified that, wow, we understand our place. There are beings greater than us and expressed to us in ways greater than we can understand. And somehow we lost that. The ancients had it, and now we don't. And I long for that, Art. I think that that might be part of our desensitizing is, there's good and bad. And I personally believe that we would like to reunite with these ancient gods. All these ancient cultures were told by their gods, we are coming back. And that's
Jason, do you think that with regard to your pets, that was something you said up there, your pets love you, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they love you enough that if you died and you were no longer feeding them, they wouldn't eat you?
They wouldn't eat me.
Yeah, in other words, the love that they felt for you would keep them from doing that.
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't eat them. I jokingly call my birds, sometimes they smell like little chicken McNuggets, but I never eat them, I love them. And we see this in interesting relationships with animals here on Earth, where a goat and a mountain lion are friends, or a bear and a dog.
That's
or,
true.
People who have had like actual lions as pets, then release them into the wild, come back 4 years later, and the lion runs out of the crowd and tackles the owner, remembering the bond, or even, yeah.
No, all of that is true. Nevertheless, I think that if they were starving, Jason, they'd chow down.
Well, I love them that much, Art, that if I'm dead and they need to feast on me, then hey.
No problem, right? Okay.
I guess that's how it is.
Well, all of this is really fascinating, and there are so many people that believe this, Jason, and they believe it to the degree that they think it's about to happen again. The cycle is about to commence.
Well, let's get back on this topic of the cycle, because it's a really close thing to me that it's very esoteric to convey, but I think is immensely important for your audience to grasp, especially people who are interested in the idea of a Nibiru and a Planet X. A couple of breaks ago, we started to talk about that there's 3 cycles of Earth, astronomical cycles. The first 2 we're aware of, and the third is a kicker. So the first one is we're spinning on our axis. This simple astronomical cycle of us spinning on our axis causes day and night. Now, we don't think about it, but when it gets dark, you lose consciousness and go to sleep because of an astronomical cycle, meaning that spin of day and night changing affects us. Cycle number 2 is we're going around the sun. And as we go around the sun, seasons change, winter, spring, summer, fall, animals migrate. There's a lot of things that happen simply because of us going around the sun. Well, there's a third cycle. All the ancients say that there's also another larger cycle, and we track it currently by calling it the precession of the equinox. And this cycle lasts 24,000 years. A lot larger. But all the ancient cultures, like the Mayans, had these intricate calendars that were tracking this large cycle of time. And they very, very clearly said that just like the first 2, this third cycle has an effect on humanity. And I think that cause or the effect is we actually go into the dark ages and forget everything, and then go into the golden age and have this closeness with God. Now, what is causing this third cycle is the new science that I've been really latched onto and studying the last few years. There's an organization, is a business partner of mine, a gentleman named Walter Cruttenden, and he does a conference every year called CPAC. Now, Walter has all of the great people like Dr. Schock, John Anthony West, Robert Bouval, Carmen Bolter, various hard hitters that are looking at the precession of the equinox model and starting to understand that, this is something that has been affecting us for a very long time. There's an interesting analogy, too, so that we can understand and put this into context. 24,000 years is a really long time. There's an insect that lives here on Earth called the mayfly, and it only lives for 24 hours. So if it's born on a cloudy day, another mayfly might come up to it and go, I've heard these rumors of like sunshine and wind, but I've never seen it.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
So it's very possible that we live such a short lifespan that we can't not consider the information being told to us that there is a larger context and that it has an effect on us.
That really is. It's a very good point. It's a really crushingly good point, Jason.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, Art. The latest science is saying that we're a binary solar system, two suns. And there seems to be a correlation between our binary orbit, where when our suns are at their closest point to each other, we're in the golden age. When the suns are at their farthest points from each other, we're in the dark ages. And as this cycle repeats, we continue to learn a bunch of information and become very advanced to a point where in the golden age, we can actually, as a whole, some of the Vedic Indian texts explain that these yogis and things that go back tens of thousands of years, they explain that in the golden age, we can actually comprehend God. So we're about 9,000 years away from being in the golden age, but we're just coming out of the bronze age. And this cycle, even Plato tracked it. He called it the great year. It's a very interesting way to start to look at our history and understanding that there might be a cyclical pattern to our evolution.
Where does God fit into this?
Well, God is, that's a little bit higher level topic than, I would have any data. But I think...
Oh, I know, but I just couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's why.
You mentioned God, and we're talking about these giant cycles, and I'm just wondering where God would fit in. I don't necessarily expect an answer, but...
Well, I have an answer for you, but I think my answer is, again, relying on our current sciences available, as well as a little, slice of faith. I think that the gods and things that are referenced in our current Bible and various texts, most other cultures don't just speak of a god, they speak of gods. Even the Hebrew Bible, God. So I think what we're looking at is all of these ancient cultures that we revere now, Egyptians, Mayans, Toltecs, Mesopotamia, they're all speaking of a time when they got to interact with what they considered to be godlike beings.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any of that now, and so we only look at a level higher than what these beings probably were, to the actual one God. There is a wonderful Sumerian tale that explains the Anunnaki's view of God. And the Anunnaki themselves explain to the Sumerians, we believe in a one God, and we call it the Father of all creation. And I kind of like that. It's a nice phrase.
I kind of like it, too. Well, we do have the Greys, maybe. What is your view, by the way, on that? Are we being currently visited, in your view?
Yes, I strongly believe that. And when we look at the historical evidence of the Greys even being depicted with Sumerians, there's depictions of these beings that they called Ijiji that assisted the Anunnaki in medical experiments and flying their craft. And they pretty much look like a gray alien. If we were created in their image and after their likeness, I'm talking about the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, if the Anunnaki did have some genetic intervention with us and made us in their image and after their likeness, it's very possible they could have taken another Zeta Reticulum or some other type of race and cloned them or done some type of genetic offshoot. Because throughout time, we have these references of the Watchers or something that is overseeing us. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So you do believe they're here?
Well, as I mentioned, Art, I feel more inclined to talk about this stuff with you than most hosts, but I don't ever really mention these other things on a lecture, but, because I stick to the ancient stuff. But I'm very intimate as far as friendships with people like Dr. Lear, Steve Neal, Whitley Strieber, not so well, but well enough that we've been through things, and I have been aware of people who have these circumstances in their life, whether it be alien abduction or removing implants or studying this phenomenon firsthand. Without a doubt, there is something happening now, and there has been for a long time. But as I mentioned, it's a little bit more difficult to get into some of these current topics without, there is a lot.
Well, I guess it's reasonable to ask. I mean, do you think that they're monitoring their work?
Sure. That's the angle I kind of take, is that I definitely think that if the Anunnaki, from that hypothesis, did create us, then why wouldn't they also have, let's call it, a worker race that's helping them with their grand medical experiment? Every time someone's abducted, it has to do with reproductive fluids or genetic information, producing offspring and things that, it's all kind of in alignment with if they are helping the Anunnaki, that's all they kind of do is kind of check up on us and relay information, because they don't really show any emotions like the ancient gods did.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jason, what I would like to do is this. I would like to tell my board off back in D.C. to go ahead and open up the phone lines right now.
Great.
We're not going to take calls just yet, but we are going to take calls, and I'll even take Skype calls for Jason Martell. This is all really, truly fascinating stuff, and I'd like an opportunity for you to be able to ask questions. So,
thank you.
We have a phone number. It's a cool one. 855-REAL-UFO or 855-732-5836. And we'll begin taking questions from the audience after the break. Anything else that you really feel is important to get in before we do?
We'll leave Art and his guest there. Sounds like a perfect good cut point to do so. And that will bring us to a close on today's march on through today one, of course, from day one, sorry. As always, please make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Get us to that goal of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. So Boxy sends those nice red boxes we can send to you guys as gifts. And of course, Google puts us on the algorithm. And until next time, like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another. Release the Krakens as we march along here from day one. Have a great night. Enjoy your night's rest. We'll see you tomorrow.